and it's good to see you once again. Sort of recalling where we left off last time. We're sort of dealing with something of what I call the oldest and the greatest story ever told, Ausar, Auset, and Heru, which I think is detailing, shall we say, the birth of our civilization. Ausar is the eponymous human being, and therefore the way of life that we have to live. And that story goes back into antiquity, shall we say, even before the birth of writing as we know it, 4,000 BC. So it probably goes back even 10,000 BC, because it definitely is the oldest, and then it's repeated later on in the pyramid text and so on. It turns out to be the backbone of shall we say, psychology, and I'm going to get to that at some point in time in terms of the psychological aspect, because I think that's important. But I want to deal more with the, shall we say, the spiritual or religious aspect, because what has happened, as you know, and we'll try to illustrate as we are discussing, is that just as humanity came out of Africa, religion, if you will, and spirituality, and maybe we'll go back to that discussion of the difference between religion and spirituality, because that's also germane. But the understanding of who we are as a people, and I mean, let's go back to 200,000 years. Here we are, human beings, with all of our five senses, plus the fact, I think, an ability to perceive that is not part of our five senses. And maybe one day in our discussions we'll get to that, because I think the way we have been brought up in terms of Western understanding is all information comes to us through the five senses, but that's not an African understanding. But there we are, in a warm climate with lots of food, a few wild animals around, but having a good time. Life is good. And we wake up in the morning, we have enough food, and we relax. We talk a lot, but at least maybe we start with sign language, but we talk a lot. And we look at the stars and wonder about what's up there, and we see the changes in the sky and the moon and and there it is. That's how we come to know who we are, how we come to know each other, and how to know the seasons, and how the seasons change, and where the star is this year and where it is 10 years from now, and so on and so forth. This is the beginning of everything, and we're not credited with that. Supposedly all of that was just primitive humanity. But what does primitive humanity mean when we know that as far as the brain capacity, as far as the anatomical Homo sapiens is concerned, there has been no evolution in the last 200,000 years. As a matter of fact, maybe the folks who went to Europe lost certain things. They lost the curl in their hair, they lost the color of their skin, maybe they lost their nasal apertures, they lost their lips. So, what is this primitive thing? I mean, let's talk about that for a while. How does early man become primitive?
What it is before there's civilization as we know it, before there's writing as we know it, before there's government as we know it. Everything before that is what scholars call prehistory. And because human beings, as we are today, have been around possibly 200,000 years, some people say slightly more, and writing as we know it goes back 8,000 years, then everything between 200,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago is what they call prehistory. But a lot of interesting things happened over that time period. We know that 90,000 years ago, Africans in the Ishango region of Central Africa were engaged in an aquatic culture. They were making fish hooks. And those fish hooks are believed to have been used to catch catfish. And because catfish is a seasonal fish, then we've got this idea of humans engaged in planning and strategy to plan to catch this fish, which is seasonal. And the fish hooks themselves, fish hooks of similar designs, ended up in West Africa, ended up in the Nile, and ended up in the Middle East. And so this might show spread of culture from Central Africa to West Africa, and from Central Africa to the Nile and into the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Then we have 43,000 years ago, evidence that Africans were digging the world's first mines. And they were doing that in Swaziland, some people call it Eswatini. And these mines are the oldest mines in the world. So one of the reasons that Europeans used to justify apartheid is if it wasn't for Europeans subjugating Africans, putting them under apartheid, the mineral wealth of Southern Africa could never have been pulled out of the ground. And no worse lie has ever been told. Southern Africans invented mining 43,000 years ago. Then the notions of time that we have today, the beginnings of the month. There's an artifact called the Lebombo bone, and the Lebombo bone found in Southern Africa is a baboon fibula, which is about this long, which has got different notches carved into it. And there's 29 notches, there's 30 spaces. And so this gives us this notion of 29 and a half, which is the same length as a lunar cycle, which is the same length as a menstrual cycle, showing that the very first people to spot the connection between the lunar cycle and the menstrual cycle would have been African women. And they did this, some people say 37,000 years ago, some people say 42,000 years ago. So that's the beginning then of humans creating time by mapping the moon. And there's a scholar, an Englishman, Gerald Massey, writing in 1907. His book was called Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World. And he theorized that because the ancient Egyptians had animal deities and animal-headed deities, this represents that the ancient Egyptians had preserved some of the religious ideas coming out of inner Africa in very, very early times. And some scholars, such as African-American professor Charles Finch, believes that he can trace the first few stages of how religion evolved from the worship of tracking the moon, tracking the sun, tracking the stars. Mm-hmm. And then out of this, we get the idea of 12 houses in the sky. And the 12 houses in the sky become 12 months. They become 12 signs of the zodiac. And then lots of religions have deified this principle of the number 12. So 12 becomes a sacred number. So you've got, in some religions, the 12 labors of Heracles. Other religions, you've got the 12 tablets of Gilgamesh. So this notion of 12, representing the 12 houses in the sky, the 12 signs of the zodiac. And there's been a whole bunch of research where people have, so one route that scholars have used has been to look at the different animal and animal-headed deities and trace it that way. Mm-hmm. Another route that people have used is to use astronomy and trace it that way. And then the astronomical theory says that astronomy was born in ancient Kush or Nubia or Sudan. Mm-hmm. And then it went to the Egyptian city of Waset or Thebes. And, you know, there's in one of the Egyptian temples, the Temple of Dendera, there's 12 signs of the zodiac on the ceiling. And then so some people have then researched it in that way. So whichever way you want to look at it, astronomy, mm-hmm. or looking at the animals and animal-headed deities, mm-hmm. we come to the same conclusion, the African origin of religion.
As a thank you for visiting our website, we are giving you a free copy of our exclusive 100 Black History Facts, which is in fact a taster of our course content. Make sure you leave your email address and we will send it right to you. We hope it inspires you to dig deeper into your history and heritage.
And you mentioned two very important people. Certainly, Gerald Massey broke new ground, and he was a great scholar in terms of linking Egypt to the rest of Africa. And you know, Charles Finch has done an excellent job in terms of shall we say, showing the relationship both between the Old Testament in terms of Judaism and the New Testament, if you will, in terms of Christianity, and the rootedness in Africa. You know, and of course, you know, you can show the table of nations, you know, coming out of Ham. You know, it's all in the Old Testament. And Nimrod in Babylon, you know, and it shows you, you know, the relationship with the Canaanites, and Mizraim is Egypt. So that whole area, and Saba, which is where you have the Arabs, so to speak, you know, and SBA. You're talking about astrological. SBA is star in the hieroglyphic language. So they were the great astronomers there also. In terms of that, and we know Sheba comes out of that kingdom there that was, you know, parallel, shall we say, across the Red Sea. So that whole area, Babylon, which, you know, ended up the Shinar, they were obviously black people, and then you go into to India, you know, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. So that whole Near East. And going further east was all African before the Indo-European invasion. You know, probably took place, I don't know, somewhere 5,000 plus 6,000 BC, something like that.